Security, escort her out. She doesn't belong here. The words landed sharp, deliberate, echoing across the glass-walled boardroom perched 40 floors above Manhattan, where a $3.4 billion deal was minutes from closing and every seat at the table carried weight. Ava Monroe didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't even look surprised. She simply stood there in a tailored charcoal coat, hands relaxed at her sides, as if the room had paused for her instead of against her. Around her, executives shifted in leather chairs, some glancing down at their tablets, others watching with quiet curiosity, unsure whether this was a mistake or something far more intentional. Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, adjusted his cufflinks with the kind of confidence that came from decades of being the loudest voice in any room. He didn't recognize her. That was clear. And worse, he had already decided who she was. "This is a private meeting," he added, his tone cooler now, controlled, rehearsed. "You need to leave." Ava's eyes moved slowly across the table, not in defiance, but in assessment, like she was cataloguing every face, every reaction, every silent agreement that had allowed this moment to unfold. She had seen this look before. Years ago, in smaller rooms, with smaller deals, when her ideas were dismissed before she finished speaking, when doors closed quietly instead of loudly. Back then, she had learned something most people in this room never had to learn. Power didn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it waited. A junior analyst near the far end of the table hesitated, fingers hovering over her phone, sensing the tension shifting beneath the surface. Two members of security stepped forward, not aggressive, just certain, following instruction the way systems are designed to function, without question. Ava finally moved, but only slightly, turning her wrist to glance at her watch. The gesture was small, almost unnoticeable, but it changed something. The air tightened. Daniel noticed it, just for a second, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Is there a problem?" he asked, impatience creeping in. Ava looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Calm. Unrushed. Precise. "No," she said quietly, her voice cutting cleaner than his ever had. "Not a problem." A pause followed. Not long. Just enough to stretch the moment thin. "You're just 3 minutes early." The room didn't understand it yet. But something had already shifted. And it wasn't in Daniel's favor. No one laughed. That was the first crack. In a room where Daniel Whitmore's words usually landed with agreement, approval, or at least polite silence, this time they just hung there, unanswered. Ava Monroe lowered her wrist slowly, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, as if she had already moved past the moment everyone else was still trying to understand. Daniel shifted slightly, just enough to betray that something in her tone had not matched his expectations. 3 minutes early for what? He asked, his voice sharper now, less composed, like he was trying to pull the room back under his control. Ava did not answer immediately. She did not need to. Around the table, devices began to light up. One by one. Subtle at first. A vibration against polished wood. A screen flickering awake. A notification no one had been expecting. The chief financial officer glanced down at his phone, then again, slower this time, his expression tightening. He did not speak, but his chair shifted back half an inch. Across from him, another executive opened a tablet, scrolling quickly, then stopping, then scrolling again as if trying to confirm what he was seeing. Daniel noticed it now. The room was no longer centered on him. "If there is something you need to say it," he pressed, his tone firm but thinner than before. Ava finally stepped forward, not toward him, but toward the center of the table, placing herself where decisions were made, not where they were dismissed. "You scheduled this closing for 11:27, she said calmly, her voice measured, factual. "You built your projections assuming no disruption." A pause. Not long, just enough to let the words land. "That was your first mistake." The junior analyst at the end of the table looked up now, fully engaged, her phone no longer hidden, her attention locked on Ava as if she had realized something the rest were still catching up to. Daniel let out a small breath through his nose, the kind that usually preceded a dismissal. "This is not your meeting," he said. Ava's eyes met his again, and this time there was something different in them. Not defiance. Not anger. Certainty. "It is now." Another wave of notifications hit the room, louder this time, more insistent. Email alerts. Internal system pings. A secure message channel opening across multiple devices at once. The chief financial officer stood up without meaning to, his chair sliding back with a soft scrape. "Daniel," he started, then stopped, his voice caught between disbelief and realization. Daniel turned toward him, irritation rising. "What is it?" The answer did not come immediately. "Because it was not something you said quickly. It was something you understood all at once or not at all." The screen at the far end of the room, the one displaying the deal summary, flickered. Updated. Refreshed. The numbers did not change. The structure did. Ownership lines redrew themselves in real time. Daniel stared at it, just for a second too long. Ava did not look at the screen. She did not need to. She already knew what it said. The room, once controlled, once predictable, had begun to tilt. And for the first time since she walked in, no one was asking her to leave. Daniel Whitmore did not sit down. He remained standing, eyes fixed on the screen as if staring harder would force it to return to what it was 30 seconds ago. It did not. The ownership column stayed exactly where it had shifted, clean and undeniable. Majority control no longer pointed to his firm. It pointed somewhere else. Someone else. The chief financial officer swallowed hard, his voice low but clear enough to cut through the silence. The shares, they were transferred through a holding structure. It closed at 11:24. He paused, glancing at Ava before finishing. 3 minutes ago. The number hung in the air like a timestamp carved into stone. Ava Monroe did not react. She simply adjusted her sleeve slightly, as if everything unfolding had already been accounted for. Around the table, the executives were no longer pretending this was a misunderstanding. Tablets were being checked. Secure dashboards refreshed. Legal teams quietly pinged through encrypted channels. The room had shifted from authority to verification. Daniel finally turned back to her, the confidence in his posture replaced with something tighter, something calculating. "That is not possible," he said, but the words lacked weight. Ava tilted her head just enough to acknowledge him. "It is already done," she replied. No emphasis. No performance. Just fact. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just enough to confirm that everyone was arriving at the same conclusion at the same time. The junior analyst at the end of the table leaned forward now, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying anyway. The acquiring entity, it is Monroe Strategic Holdings. She stopped, then looked directly at Ava. That is you. No one corrected her. No one challenged it. Because by now, every screen in the room said the same thing. Daniel exhaled slowly, one hand pressing against the edge of the table as if grounding himself in something that no longer held. You orchestrated this, he said. It was not a question. Ava met his gaze without hesitation. I executed it, she answered. Another pause followed, heavier this time. The kind that changes the hierarchy of a room. Daniel's eyes moved across the table, searching for support, for alignment, for someone who would push back on what was happening. But no one did. Not because they agreed with her. But because the numbers did. And in a room like this, numbers always spoke louder than titles. Ava took a single step closer to the center, her presence no longer something to question, but something to acknowledge. You built this meeting to finalize control, she said calmly. You invited your board, your legal team, your investors. Her eyes moved briefly across the faces around her, then returned to him. What you did not account for was someone else closing first. The chief financial officer lowered himself back into his chair slowly, as if the weight of the moment had finally caught up with him. "Daniel, the board is already being notified," he said quietly. "Control has shifted." That was it. No dramatic announcement. No raised voices. Just a sentence that ended an era. Ava did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply stood there, steady and unshaken, as the structure of power in that room rearranged itself around her. And for the first time since she walked in, Daniel Whitmore was not the one in control of what happened next. No one spoke immediately after that. The silence was not confusion anymore. It was recognition. The kind that settles slowly, then all at once. Daniel Whitmore straightened, forcing his shoulders back, trying to reclaim posture before he could reclaim control. "Even if the shares transferred," he said, his voice steadier now, calculated, "this does not give you operational authority in this room." It was a reach. A final attempt to redraw a line that had already been erased. Ava Monroe did not respond right away. She let the statement sit there, just long enough for everyone else to measure it against the data already glowing on their screens. Then she turned slightly, her gaze shifting past Daniel to the far end of the table where legal counsel sat frozen, still reviewing documents that had already updated without their input. "Check the clause labeled executive override," she said calmly. The attorney hesitated for half a second, then tapped through the file, eyes scanning quickly before stopping. His expression changed first. Then his posture. "It is active," he said quietly. "Effective immediately upon majority acquisition." That was the second crack. This time, it did not stay contained. A ripple moved through the room as people adjusted in their seats, no longer observing but repositioning. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. "Not yet." Ava stepped forward again, closing the last bit of distance to the center of the table, her presence no longer questioned by anyone who understood what had just been confirmed. "You prepared this deal to consolidate power," she said, her tone even, almost instructional. What you did not prepare for was losing it before the meeting began. Across the table, the chief financial officer exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple as if trying to process the speed of it all. "The board call, it is already scheduled," he said under his breath. "They are expecting an update." Daniel turned sharply toward him. "Then we give them one," he replied, but the words lacked the command they once carried. Ava heard it too. The shift. The hesitation. She did not need to press harder. The room was already doing that for her. A notification sounded again, louder this time as someone failed to silence it quickly enough. A direct message from the board. Urgent. Visible on more than one screen. Daniel glanced at it, then away, then back again as if hoping it would disappear. It did not. Ava followed his line of sight without moving her head. "You can take that," she said. "They will want to hear from you." Another pause. This one longer. He did not reach for his phone. Not immediately. Because reaching meant acknowledging. And acknowledging meant accepting. Around him, the executives who had entered this room aligned under his authority now sat still, waiting, not for his direction, but for clarity. And that clarity was no longer coming from him. Ava placed her hand lightly on the edge of the table, not claiming it, not needing to, just anchoring the moment. "This is where it changes," she said quietly. No one interrupted. No one questioned. Because by now, the room had already shifted sides. And Daniel Whitmore knew it. He just had not said it out loud yet. Daniel Whitmore finally reached for his phone. The movement was small, but in a room like this, it felt like a signal flare. Every eye tracked it. Every breath held just a second longer. He glanced at the screen, then pressed accept without putting it on speaker, turning slightly away as if he could still contain what was happening. "This is Whitmore," he said, voice-controlled, professional, the version of himself that had closed deals for decades. A pause. Then another. The shift came not from what he said, but from what he did not say. His shoulders tightened. His eyes flicked once toward the screen at the end of the table, then back down again. Yes, he added, quieter now. I am aware. Across from him, the chief financial officer lowered his gaze, no longer pretending to review documents. He already knew. Everyone did. Ava Monroe remained still, her hand resting lightly against the table, her presence steady, unhurried, as if time had slowed down around her while it accelerated for everyone else. She had seen this moment before. Not here. Not at this scale. But in smaller rooms, earlier years, when decisions were made without her voice, when authority dismissed her before understanding her. Back then, she had learned not to rush the moment when truth revealed itself. Because when it did all the work for you. Daniel turned back toward the table slowly, ending the call without a word. He did not need to repeat what had been said. It was already written across his face. The board has confirmed the transfer, he stated, each word measured, deliberate. They are requesting immediate restructuring of this session. No one reacted loudly. There were no gasps. No raised voices. Just quiet recalibration. Chairs shifted. Postures adjusted. The alignment in the room continued to move, inch by inch, away from him. Ava took a breath, not for composure, but as if marking the transition from one phase to the next. Then let us not keep them waiting, she said. Her tone did not rise. It did not need to. It carried. The legal counsel closed his folder slowly, no longer reviewing but accepting. The junior analyst straightened in her seat, her earlier uncertainty replaced with focus. Even the security personnel near the door had stepped back, their presence no longer directed at Ava, but undefined, neutral, waiting for instruction that had not yet been given. Daniel looked at her again, this time without dismissal, without assumption. Just recognition. Not of who she was as a person, but of what she now represented in that room. Authority. Final. Documented. Verified. You planned this timing, he said, not accusing, not praising, just stating. Ava met his gaze, calm as ever. I respected it, she replied. A subtle difference. But in that moment, it said everything. Another notification sounded. Then another. The board was not waiting anymore. They were moving. And now, so was the room. Ava stepped forward fully, taking the position that had once belonged to him without announcement, without resistance, because by now, resistance no longer had a place to stand. Let us begin again, she said quietly. And this time, no one questioned whether she belonged there. The room did not reset all at once. It recalibrated in layers. Slowly. Precisely. Ava Monroe remained at the center, not speaking for a moment, allowing the silence to settle into structure. It was no longer tension. It was alignment. Around her, screen stayed active, numbers stable, ownership confirmed across every device that mattered. No one questioned the data anymore. The only question left was what came next. Daniel Whitmore did not sit down. Not yet. He stood where he had always stood, but the position no longer carried the same weight. His hand rested against the back of his chair, fingers tightening slightly as if holding onto something that was already gone. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, his voice lower now, measured, controlled in a different way. Not commanding. Calculating. Ava turned her attention to the table, not to him directly, addressing the room as a whole. We proceed, she said. But we proceed under corrected leadership. No hesitation. No pause for approval. Because approval had already been transferred. The legal counsel nodded once, almost instinctively, then caught himself and straightened, aware of how quickly his alignment had shifted. The chief financial officer leaned forward, elbows resting on the table now, fully engaged. The structure will need to be updated immediately, he said. Board representation, voting control, executive oversight. Ava acknowledged him with a slight nod. Already accounted for, she replied. A few more screens refreshed. Documents updated in real time. Names moved. Titles adjusted. Authority reassigned not through discussion, but through execution. Daniel watched it happen, not interrupting this time, his silence no longer resistance, but recognition. He had seen takeovers before. He had led them. But he had never been on this side of one. Ava's voice remained steady as she continued. Effective immediately, all decisions made in this room are subject to Monroe Strategic Holdings oversight. She let the word settle, then added, including prior assumptions. A subtle statement. But it carried weight. Because it reached backward, not just forward. The junior analyst glanced up again, eyes moving between Ava and the updated documents, understanding now not just what had happened, but how complete it was. This was not a disruption. It was a replacement. Daniel finally pulled out his chair and sat down, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a quiet acceptance of position. Not removed. Not dismissed. But no longer leading. You are moving quickly, he said, not as criticism, but observation. Ava met his gaze briefly. No, she replied. I am moving on time. Another shift. Subtle. But final. The security personnel near the door exchanged a glance, then stepped further back, their role now undefined, their earlier instructions irrelevant. No one told them to stand down. They simply understood. Ava placed both hands lightly on the table, anchoring herself not as an outsider stepping in, but as the authority already established. We will review the deal structure, she said. We will finalize under corrected terms. And we will proceed without delay. No one objected. No one questioned. Because by now, the room had already made its decision without a vote. Daniel Whitmore looked across at her one more time, not with dismissal, not with doubt, but with clarity. He understood exactly what had happened. He had tried to remove her from a room that had already been hers. And now, there was nothing left to remove. Only what remained to be rebuilt under her control. The momentum did not slow down. It sharpened. Ava Monroe shifted her focus from the room to the data, her fingers gliding once across the tablet in front of her as if confirming what was already locked in. Pull up the revised valuation model, she said, her voice calm but directive. The chief financial officer reacted instantly this time, no hesitation, no glance toward Daniel for approval. The screen at the far end of the room refreshed again, numbers reorganizing, projections recalculating under new control assumptions. A subtle change. But in a deal of this size, subtle meant everything. You adjusted the leverage ratio, the chief financial officer noted, leaning forward, eyes narrowing as he processed the implications. Ava nodded slightly. I corrected it, she replied. Across the table, a senior advisor shifted in his seat, finally speaking after minutes of silence. This changes the risk exposure significantly, he said. Ava turned her gaze toward him, steady, unshaken. It reveals it, she answered. The distinction landed. The room absorbed it. Daniel Whitmore watched the exchange without interruption, his expression no longer resistant, but analytical, as if he had shifted roles without announcing it. He was no longer defending the structure. He was studying the one that replaced it. You have been tracking this longer than we realized, he said quietly. Ava did not deny it. She did not confirm it either. She simply continued. The original model assumed compliance, she said. This one assumes reality. Another ripple of understanding moved through the room. Screens updated again. A legal document restructured itself in real time, clauses repositioned, authority lines clarified. The legal counsel adjusted his glasses, reading faster now, no longer reviewing for errors, but aligning with direction. The executive override extends to final signature authority, he said. Ava acknowledged with a brief glance. Effective immediately, she confirmed. The junior analyst at the end of the table leaned closer to her screen, her earlier uncertainty now replaced with focus and precision. she was no longer observing. She was part of it. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hands now resting on the table, no longer gripping the edge, no longer holding on to what had shifted. "You anticipated every move," he said. Ava met his eyes briefly. "I respected every pattern," she replied. Another silence followed. Not heavy this time. Clear. Structured. The kind of silence that comes when decisions are already made and the room is simply catching up. The chief financial officer nodded once, almost to himself. "Then we proceed under the revised structure," he said. No one objected. No one looked to Daniel for confirmation. Because confirmation had already been reassigned. Ava placed her tablet down, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. "We finalize within the hour," she said. "No delays. No revisions outside this framework." The directive settled into the room like a final piece clicking into place. Daniel Whitmore looked at her again, not with resistance, not with disbelief, but with a clarity that had taken the entire meeting to arrive. He understood now. This was not disruption. It was precision. It was timing. It was control executed without noise. And in that moment, the reality became undeniable. He had not lost the room when the numbers changed. He had lost it the moment he decided she did not belong in it. Ava turned slightly toward the screen, her voice calm, unwavering. "Continue," she said. And just like that, the meeting moved forward. Not under him. Under her. For a brief moment, everything moved forward exactly as planned. Numbers aligned. Documents updated. Voices stayed low, controlled, precise. But beneath that surface, something else settled in the room. Not tension. Not confusion. Memory. Ava Monroe did not look at the screen anymore. She did not need to. The system was running exactly as she designed it. Instead, her gaze drifted slightly past the glass walls, toward the skyline beyond, where the city moved without pause, unaware of what had just shifted 40 floors above. She had been in rooms like this before. Not at the head of the table. Not with this level of control. But she remembered the feeling. Years ago, a different boardroom. Smaller. Colder. A deal she had built from nothing. She had walked in prepared, numbers tight, projection solid, strategy clear. And still, they had looked at her the same way Daniel did when she entered today. Not curious. Not cautious. Certain. Certain she was in the wrong place. Certain she did not belong at the table. She remembered the exact words. "We are looking for someone with more institutional presence." It had sounded professional. Polite. Controlled. But she knew what it meant. She had left that room without raising her voice, without arguing, without trying to convince anyone of anything. Because in that moment, she understood something they did not. She did not need their approval. She needed time. And time, when used correctly, rewrites every assumption. Back in the present, the chief financial officer was speaking again, outlining next steps, restructuring timelines, recalculating integration phases under the new authority. His voice was steady now, fully aligned, fully engaged. The legal counsel followed, confirming compliance pathways, regulatory adjustments, everything falling into place with quiet efficiency. The room had accepted the new structure. Not emotionally. Functionally. Which, in a room like this, mattered more. Ava turned back toward the table slowly, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, grounded fully in the present. The past had done its work. It always did. She did not carry it as weight. She carried it as precision. Daniel Whitmore watched her, not interrupting, not questioning, just observing. He had built his career on reading rooms, understanding power before it was spoken. And now, for the first time in a long time, he was reading a room that no longer centered around him. "You have done this before," he said quietly. Ava met his gaze for a brief second. Not like this, she replied. Honest. Direct. But complete in its meaning. Because this was not repetition. This was evolution. The junior analyst typed quickly now, documenting changes, capturing decisions, her movements sharp, focused, no longer uncertain. She was witnessing something that would be studied later. Something that did not happen often. A complete shift of control without disruption. Without noise. Without warning. Ava placed her hand back on the table, grounding the moment again. We finalized the agreement under the revised model, she said. No legacy clauses. No deferred authority. The directive was clear. Absolute. No one challenged it. Because by now, challenge was not part of the system anymore. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling once, slow, controlled. You waited, he said. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the words sit there just long enough to acknowledge them without confirming. Then she answered, her voice steady, unshaken. I prepared. And in that difference, everything that had happened made sense. The room did not need further explanation. It never did. Because the results were already in front of them. Clear. Final. Irreversible. The room had reached a new rhythm. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Precise. Every voice that spoke now did so with intention, each word aligned with the structure that had already been set in motion. Ava Monroe stood at the center of it, not dominating the room, but defining it. We move to final authorization, she said, her tone steady, leaving no space for delay. The legal counsel nodded immediately, pulling up the final signature protocol, his earlier hesitation replaced with full compliance. All documents are ready for execution under the revised authority, he confirmed. The chief financial officer adjusted his screen, reviewing the final numbers one last time, then leaned back slightly. Funding pathways are secured. There are no outstanding barriers, he added. Ava gave a slight nod, acknowledging both statements without pausing the momentum. Across the table, Daniel Whitmore remained silent, his attention fixed not on the documents anymore, but on her. He was no longer analyzing the deal. He was analyzing the shift. The moment where everything changed. You timed this down to the minute, he said finally, his voice calm, stripped of resistance. Ava did not look at him right away. She let the process continue, allowing the system to move forward under her direction before she answered. Timing is not precision, she said. Execution is. The distinction settled quietly into the room. The junior analyst glanced up again, her expression focused, absorbing not just the data, but the language of control that now defined the space. A final notification appeared across multiple screens. Board confirmation. Authorization granted. The last step. The legal counsel inhaled once, then spoke. We are clear to proceed with signatures. Ava stepped forward slightly, closing the final distance to the table, her presence now fully integrated into the structure that had replaced the old one. She did not reach for a pen immediately. She did not rush the moment. Instead, she looked across the room, meeting each set of eyes briefly, not for approval, but for acknowledgement. Then she spoke. We finalize under the revised structure. No reversals. No amendments outside this agreement. No one objected. No one even considered it. Because by now, reversal was not an option. The system had already moved past that point. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his posture no longer defensive, no longer strained. Just still. You built this without anyone noticing, he said. Ava finally turned her gaze toward him fully. No, she replied. You just were not looking. Another silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Not tense. Just complete. The legal counsel slid the digital authorization forward. Ava placed her hand on the tablet, her movement smooth, deliberate, final. With a single confirmation, the deal closed. Not as it was originally designed, but as it had been redefined. The screen updated instantly. Status: completed. Ownership: confirmed. Authority: Monroe Strategic Holdings. The room did not react loudly. It did not need to. The shift had already happened long before this moment. This was just the confirmation. Ava stepped back slightly, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. Around her, the executives began to move again, not in confusion, but in alignment, preparing for the next phase under new leadership. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, watching the final update on the screen, then looking back at her one last time. There was no frustration in his expression now. No disbelief. Just clarity. He had tried to remove her from a room that had already belonged to her. And now, there was nothing left to question. Only what came next under her control. The confirmation did not end the moment. It expanded it. The screen remained still, the word completed holding more weight than any announcement could carry. Around the table, movement resumed, but it was different now. Purposeful. Directed. Aligned under a structure that had already replaced the one they walked in with. Ava Monroe did not celebrate. She did not shift her tone or her posture. She simply continued, as if the outcome had always been inevitable. We transition immediately into integration, she said, her voice calm, controlled, leaving no room for delay. The chief financial officer nodded without hesitation, already pulling up the next set of projections. We will need to recalibrate all reporting lines within the next 24 hours, he said. Ava acknowledged with a slight glance. 12, she corrected. Not aggressive. Not forceful. Just precise. The adjustment landed, and no one challenged it. Because by now, challenge was no longer part of the system. The legal counsel closed out the finalized documents and opened a new file, his movements efficient, aligned. We will notify all departments under the revised authority immediately, he said. Ava turned slightly toward him. No delays in communication, she added. Clarity prevents resistance. Another simple statement. But in that room, it functioned as instruction. Across the table, the junior analyst typed quickly, documenting every directive, every adjustment, her earlier hesitation fully replaced by focus. She was no longer witnessing uncertainty. She was witnessing control in its cleanest form. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, his eyes moving from the screen to Ava, then back again. The deal was done. The structure had shifted. But what stayed with him was not the numbers. It was the moment before all of this, when he had decided she did not belong. You did not just take control of the deal, he said quietly. Ava turned her gaze toward him, not dismissing, not engaging emotionally, just present. You changed the direction of the company. Ava held his gaze for a brief second, then answered without hesitation. It needed to change, she said. No explanation. No justification. Just fact. The room absorbed it without question. Because by now, the evidence was already in motion around them. Systems updating. Notification sending. Authority shifting across networks that extended far beyond this room. Ava stepped back slightly from the table, not retreating, but creating space for the system to operate without her constant presence. That was the difference. Control was no longer something she had to assert. It was something the structure now carried for her. We move forward without interruption, she said. No legacy decisions override this framework. The chief financial officer nodded again. The legal counsel confirmed compliance. The analyst continued documenting. Every piece in motion. Every role aligned. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, the tension no longer present, replaced by something quieter. Understanding. I misread you, he said. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the statement exist without correcting it, without softening it. Then she spoke, her voice steady, unshaken. You did not read at all. The words were not sharp. They were not emotional. They were exact. And in that exactness, they carried more weight than anything else said in the room. No one interrupted. No one reacted. Because the truth had already done its work. Ava turned her attention back to the room as a whole, her presence still anchoring the space even as the system moved forward independently. "Continue," she said. And just like that, the next phase began, not as a recovery, not as an adjustment, but as a continuation under leadership that had been there all along, waiting for the moment to be recognized. The room did not celebrate the transition. It absorbed it. Quietly. Efficiently. Like a system that had already accepted its new parameters and was now simply executing them. Ava Monroe stood slightly apart from the table now, not removed, but no longer needing to occupy the center to define it. The structure was doing that for her. Across the room, conversations began to branch into action. The chief financial officer was already coordinating with external teams, his voice low, precise, outlining immediate reporting adjustments. The legal counsel moved through compliance confirmations, his earlier caution replaced with speed. Every piece was in motion. And none of it required Ava to repeat herself. That was the difference. Authority had shifted from presence to process. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, watching it unfold, not as an outsider, but as someone recalculating his position inside a system he once controlled. His hands rested calmly on the table now, no tension left in his posture, only awareness. "You did not just prepare for the deal," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You prepared for every response to it." Ava turned slightly, her gaze meeting his without hesitation. "I prepared for what happens after people underestimate the moment," she replied. The statement did not land as criticism. It landed as clarity. Around them, the junior analyst paused for a second, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she listened, then continued typing, capturing every word as if she understood its weight. The room was no longer reacting. It was learning. Ava took a slow step toward the glass wall, her reflection faint against the skyline, her posture unchanged, her presence still anchoring everything behind her. She did not look at the city. She looked through it, as if everything outside this room was already part of the next phase. "We finalize internal restructuring within 12 hours, she said, her voice carrying without effort. "All divisions align under the revised authority model. No exceptions." The chief financial officer confirmed immediately. The legal counsel echoed compliance readiness. No one asked for clarification. Because there was none needed. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his voice steady, no longer defensive. "And my role?" he asked. It was not a challenge. Not resistance. Just a question that acknowledged the shift fully. Ava turned back toward him, her expression neutral, her tone consistent. "You remain where your value is clear," she said. "But not where your assumptions lead." A pause followed. Not uncomfortable. Not tense. Just definitive. Daniel nodded once, slowly, accepting not just the answer, but the framework behind it. The junior analyst glanced up again, her eyes moving between them, understanding that she was watching something that would not be explained in reports or summaries. This was not just a change in leadership. It was a redefinition of it. Ava stepped back toward the table one final time, placing her hand lightly against the surface, not to claim it, but to close the moment she had opened the second she walked into the room. This meeting was built to confirm control, she said calmly. Now it reflects it. No one spoke. No one needed to. Because everything that followed would move under that truth. Ava removed her hand, straightened slightly, and without announcement, without ceremony, shifted her attention toward the next phase already in motion. The room did not watch her leave the moment behind. It moved with her. Because by now, there was no longer a question of who led. Only how far that leadership would go. By the time the meeting reached its final phase, the room no longer felt like the same space it had been less than an hour ago. The glass walls were still there, the skyline unchanged, the polished table reflecting the same overhead lights, but the energy had transformed completely. What once held quiet control under Daniel Whitmore now carried a different kind of authority. One that did not need to assert itself. Ava Monroe stood near the head of the table again, not because she claimed the position, but because the system had placed her there without resistance. All divisions will receive updated directives within the next hour, she said, her voice steady, final. No interpretation. No delay. Execution only. The chief financial officer confirmed instantly, already drafting the communication that would ripple through every level of the organization. The legal counsel finalized compliance notices, his earlier caution now replaced with certainty. Around them, every screen displayed alignment. No conflicting data. No unresolved pathways. Just a structure that had been fully rewritten and now stood without gaps. Daniel Whitmore rose from his chair slowly, not abruptly, not as a reaction, but as a quiet acknowledgement that remaining seated no longer matched the moment. He adjusted his jacket, his movements controlled, his composure intact, but something deeper had shifted. Not defeat. Not frustration. Recognition. You did not just take control, he said, his voice calm, measured, directed toward Ava without resistance. You replaced the system that allowed this room to operate the way it did. Ava met his gaze without hesitation. Systems do not fail on their own, she replied. They reflect what people allow. The words did not rise. They did not cut. They settled. And in settling, they carried weight that did not need emphasis. The junior analyst paused again, her fingers still, her eyes fixed on Ava as if trying to capture not just the moment, but the meaning behind it. This was not just a takeover. It was exposure. The room itself had revealed what it had always been capable of becoming. Ava took a step back from the table, giving space not out of retreat, but out of control. She no longer needed to stand at the center for the room to move under her direction. It already was. We move forward without legacy bias, she said. Every decision from this point reflects the structure as it exists now. Not as it was. The chief financial officer nodded. The legal counsel confirmed. No hesitation. No resistance. Because by now, resistance had nowhere to anchor itself. Daniel looked around the room one last time, his eyes moving across the faces that had once aligned under his authority, now recalibrated under hers. There was no anger in his expression. No disbelief. Just clarity that had arrived too late to change anything. I built this room to operate on control, he said quietly. Ava did not interrupt. She let him finish. And I never questioned who that control excluded. A brief silence followed. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just real. Ava nodded once, acknowledging the statement without amplifying it. Then she answered, her voice steady, grounded. Now it includes what it should have from the start. The room did not respond. It absorbed. Because the truth did not need reaction. It needed recognition. Ava turned slightly, her attention already shifting beyond the room, beyond the deal, toward what came next. The system was no longer in transition. It was active. Alive. Moving. And she had not forced it into place. She had simply revealed what it was always capable of becoming when the right authority stepped in. The room did not end with applause. It ended with alignment. Screens dimmed slightly as tasks moved from confirmation to execution, messages already traveling beyond the glass walls to teams that would never see this moment but would feel its impact within hours. Ava Monroe stood still for a second longer, not to pause, but to let the system carry itself forward without her needing to guide every step. That was the final shift. Control no longer required presence. It required structure. Around the table, people began gathering their materials, not in a rush, not in confusion, but with purpose, each movement reflecting a new understanding of where authority now lived. The chief financial officer stepped away first, already on a call, his tone precise, outlining timelines that had been decided before anyone else realized a decision had been made. The legal counsel followed, organizing documents that no longer needed revision, only enforcement. Even the junior analyst paused before standing, looking once more at Ava as if committing the moment to memory, then turning to her screen to finalize the last entries. Daniel Whitmore remained where he was, standing now, his gaze steady, not on the table, not on the screens, but on Ava. "You did not raise your voice once," he said quietly. It was not admiration. It was realization. Ava met his gaze, calm, unchanged. "I did not need to," she replied. Simple. Direct. Final. A brief silence followed, but it was no longer filled with tension. It was filled with understanding that had arrived too late to prevent anything, but early enough to define what came next. Daniel nodded once, slow, deliberate. Not agreement. Not resistance. Just acknowledgement of a truth that had already reshaped everything around him. Ava turned toward the glass wall one last time, the city stretching endlessly beyond, unchanged and yet entirely different in what it now represented. She had walked into this room without announcement, without recognition, and within minutes, everything had shifted without noise, without force, without spectacle. That was the difference. Real power did not need to prove itself. It revealed itself when challenged. She stepped away from the table, not as someone leaving, but as someone moving forward, the room behind her already continuing without interruption, already functioning under a structure that no longer depended on who spoke the loudest or who entered first. It depended on who understood the moment. As she reached the door, she paused for just a fraction of a second, not turning back, not needing to, her voice steady, carrying just enough to be heard without effort. "Next time," she said, "do not decide who belongs before you understand who leads." She did not wait for a response. She did not need one. The door opened. The hallway beyond was quiet, controlled, ready. And as she stepped out, the room behind her did not fall apart. It moved forward. Because the shift was never about a single moment. It was about what that moment revealed. And now, everyone in that room knew exactly what that was.